After I'd agreed to read and reflect on an essay among the many that have been published in the nation over the course of the 150 years of war, peace, famine, plenty, progress, reaction, justice, venality, failure, triumph, during which the nation has steadfastly provided our nation an exemplar and reminder of what the working mind of a democratic society is supposed to sound like, after I'd said yes to reading something that the nation staff had selected, I received 3 selections to choose among. The first was an essay by Jean-Paul Sartre, Americans and Their Myths, written in 1946. Here's a sample from that essay. There are the great myths, the myths of happiness, of progress, of liberty, of triumphant maternity, and then there are the Americans, who, though conventionally happy, suffer from an obscure malaise, who are tragic through fear of being so, through that total absence of the tragic in them and around them. Jean-Paul Sartre adds that perhaps nowhere else than in America will you find such a discrepancy between people and myth, between life and the representation of life. Is that really true, Jean-Paul? I mean, myth and life are always wildly discrepant, aren't they? And in 1946, when you wrote that, hadn't you just come through one of the ghastliest examples human history has to offer of the nightmare that invariably occurs when people conflate myth and reality? And by the way, weren't we goony, happiness-addicted Americans there with you for a lot of that nightmare, helping out? And did you really think in 1946 that Americans had only experienced the tragedy of refusing to accept that life is tragic? It took a lot of courage, not to say nerve, to write that in 1946, Jean-Paul, and I've always admired you, and I sort of like your books. Not your plays so much, frankly, but Parts of Being and Nothingness are great, and the insanely long Freud screenplay. And kudos to the nation for having the guts to publish you, but, well, maybe this current moment that we're living through doesn't strike me as an especially auspicious moment to turn to the old country for advice on myth management. The second choice was Gore Vidal's 1990 essay, Notes on Our Patriarchal State, and I had to pass on that as well because, well, Gore, he's dazzling, he's often very funny, he knows a lot, he was everywhere and did everyone and met everything, and he was gorgeous. Glad you got that. And I'm indebted to him as a gay man, and when I've been an occasional essayist, I felt myself to be influenced by his arguments, his politics, and certainly his prose style. But I don't like the way his dissent feels like a style, not the way that his politics feel, to me, shaped and circumscribed by the dictates of form. I agree with him that our state is currently patriarchal, but don't go looking in Gore's essay for any analysis of gender-based oppression or anything that sounds like feminism, because the sounds of neither discourse would harmonize well with Gore's perfectly tuned song of the weary exiled aristocrat mourning wittily for the smallholders' republic that the age of the Caesars has swept away. Instead, what we get are sentences like, the two parties, which are really one party, cannot be put to use. They are the country's ownership-made carnival. Those are very nice sentences, and Gore's punishment for having written them ought to be watching the GOP candidate's next debate start to finish twice. To make him do more than that would be inhuman. And in my opinion, Vidal really got Lincoln wrong. That's just a little side. Anyway, I guess I'm mentioning the 2 essays I decided not to read because believing as I do that the nation has steadfastly provided our nation with an exemplar and reminder of what the working mind of a democratic society is supposed to sound like doesn't mean that everything the nation has printed over the past 150 years has been correct. What I find in its pages in any given issue, and I know this is an experience I share with all you loyal nation readers, are things that will infuriate and exasperate as well as enlighten, persuade, and move. The voices of the writers of the nation has published are human, hence flawed. But what makes the community the magazine has gathered always worth visiting, worth engaging with over and over, flaws and all, for 150 years, is that which, in my opinion, distinguishes the thinking of the left, even when in error, that which makes progressive thought throughout history more reflective than conservative thought is of life as it is actually lived. Again, not always with scientific precision or infallible accuracy, but if you have a hope of understanding the experiences of human beings at any given historical instant, you will try to discern the perimeters of the field delineated by those whose first loyalty is not to conservation, but to transformation, not to the preservation of power, but to its purposes and its dissemination. So I decided to read the third option, which is an excerpt from an essay, The United States and the Artist, by Zona Gale, which The Nation published on July 1st of 1925. 4 years before she wrote this essay, Zona Gale became the first woman playwright to win the Pulitzer Prize for Drama for her play Miss Lulu Bett. It's a very good play, and even better in its original form as a novel, in its original dramatic form, because Zona Gale softened the feminism of the ending to make it palatable for Broadway audiences. Her novel of the same title is even better than the play. It's an extraordinary account of the awakening of an awareness of oppression as the effect of a series of small shocks disrupting a placid, domesticated misery. Ms. Gale was a founder of the Women's Peace Party, a participant in the suffrage movement, in the La Follette progressive movement, and through a truly remarkable and original run of short stories set in a fictional Midwestern town called Friendship Village, Zona Gale promoted the agendas of both the municipal housekeeping reform movement, of women's rights, and of racial equality. Those stories are propagandistic, schematic, pedagogical, and also formally enormously peculiar, in part because of their absolutely unapologetic dogmatism, in part because of the way Gale's lively and strange characters, the members of the Friendship Village Married Ladies Cemetery Improvement Sodality, led by a woman named Calliope Marsh, complicate their creators' political intentions, and in part because of a kind of a radical refusal on the author's part to allow struggles to result in pessimism and despair. Jean-Paul Sartre would maybe not have liked Zona Gale's work so much, but well, we've already discussed that. Zona Gale wrote 25 books, over 300 short stories, and God knows how many essays. Meridel Lesueur called her one of the early prophets of America, and for decades since her death, her work has been terribly, shamefully neglected. The patriarchal state at work, Gore. She might not be one of the great American writers, perhaps, but her work merits real attention. The essay The Nation published isn't typical of her writing, maybe of the essays, which I'm not familiar with, but in her novels and her stories, she's a chameleon. What is representative of Zona Gale's writing, as I've come to know it in this excerpt, is her way of playing with and on her dispossession on grounds of gender from an acknowledgement of artistic mastery, making it into a kind of wry, sleight of hand, fluid and telegraphic locution. Also typical is what I take as a toying with mastery itself, manifest in a kind of transparency of effort, authorial will, and a willingness to be publicly ungainly, to risk mistakes in the pursuit of truth. This is from The United States and the Artist by Zona Gale in 1925. Can an artist exist and function freely in the United States? I think that he can do so if he knows where and how. Certain hazards among us are to be conceded and survived. Others there are, and if the artist is a Negro, his difficulties are needlessly greater in this country than in any other land in the civilized world. In general, the great United States handicap is none of these. It lies deeper and is not to be conquered by praise or fellowship or loaf and flask. It's great. It's so weird. It is the lack in the national life of that indefinable control by the ordered, the accustomed, the mellow, the dreaming, the old. We know that we are without memories or echoes. Time is neither our asset nor our despair, but merely our hope. We are not the old world. Take that, Jean-Paul. If I were an artist, I should, in the light of my experience, stay here and confidently expect to do my work. I should know that from out the decays of Italy and the fatigues of France and the deepening impassivities of Great Britain, one could look and imagine no more challenging artistic adventure than waits in this land with the unimaginative name. I should know that if in the ancient days I had gone questing for a field, I should very likely have renounced everything in exchange for the terms of our unique life. Art seeks to interpret the human spirit, naked in the universe, itself without nationality or academy or learned society or pension or past. If then an artist looks out upon that spirit hard enough, even in this land so lacking in the scrutiny, the pattern, or the label of the past, albeit not without something of the fragrance of the universal breath, it may be that he will forget the difficulties of keeping his covenant in the United States. He will be in no illusion. He will know, sadly enough, that he has turned from the flowered debris, the resonant footsteps the delicate somnolence, the emanations of genius and of ruin. He will be in no illusion. And when our 100%ers come and tell him that he has the best country on earth to write in, he will emphatically demur. He will reply that there is no best country to write in. There are only an old world and a new. You make your choice. Thank you.